Hey everyone, my name is Robert Sertivant. I'm the youth pastor here at Element, and this is Cameron Mitchell. Cameron is our youth worship leader. Cameron's been a part of our church for a long, long time, since he was in, 7th grade?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And we're really thankful today to have Cameron here with us. Particularly, we're going to be talking today about race relations in our country. You know, we're sitting here over a month since George Floyd's death, and the protests and the conversations that have come particularly from his death have been ones that have really created some systemic waves throughout our country that have been long needed. But today we're not necessarily just going to be talking about race relations in our country, but more wanting to hear from Cameron and his experience and his story. And Cameron is so gracious to do this. This is not something that we've asked him necessarily to do. This is something that he wanted to do and wanted to share his experience, because Cameron has a unique experience of growing up here in Homewood and growing up in our church. And so we're thankful that he's here to share about it today.
Yeah, glad to do this.
So why don't we just start with, especially for those who just know you as Cameron, the worship leader, and see you as an adult mentor and leader to them, share with everybody just how you've grown up and what your experience, particularly in Homewood and in Birmingham, has been.
Yeah, so my parents moved us to Homewood right after my sister was born in 2001. So I've been here since right before kindergarten. I actually went to preschool here at Trinity, so it's kind of a full circle deal to be 23 and working here. I have enjoyed living in Homewood. It's been a great community. I've learned a lot about myself and about how to interact with the world through this community. I don't have any horror stories about being black in this city, but I will say that as I've gotten older and started to try to figure myself out, it's impossible not to notice that I'm different, that I'm black in a white place. And that doesn't always come in the form of like a horrible rude awakening, but it's the little things that kind of have just little moments of realization have shaped how I view the world, for better or for worse sometimes. So.
Yeah. Well, and particularly being in a predominantly white church, talk a little bit about what it was like to be a student here, and then maybe in a moment we can talk a little bit about what it's like to be one of the leaders of this church.
I started coming here when I was, I believe, 13, so almost 10 years, somewhere in there. This church has always been a space of solitude, consistency, and learning for me. So not only did I learn what it means to be a compassionate, loving Christian here, I also learned how to play music here through Stuart Downing and Trey Hill. That's how I met you. I met you, we led worship at First Priority together when I was in middle school, and so it's given me an outlet through the things that I love to come to know Jesus and to come and be a part of a wonderful community. But it is also, like I said about growing up in Homewood, it's impossible not to realize that you're in a white space. This space was not necessarily created with me in mind, you know. Trinity has a history of being racist at times, and while we're far removed from that, there's still a lot of progress to be made. It's very interesting to come to Element Cafe. Let's say we have 100 students, maybe 15 of them will be black, a few more Hispanic, maybe a few Asian children, but like this is a white space, and it rings true when we look at our demographics here. It's hard not to notice that as a black person.
You talked a little bit about growing up in Homewood and how seeing Homewood as a space that like you didn't have any horror stories necessarily, but I'm thinking particularly as someone who is white, who likes to think of himself as aware of, you know, microaggressions and systemic racism that has plagued our country, you know, since really its founding. I like to think that, I know what's racist and I know what's not. Mm-hmm. Right? But the reality is I usually have no clue. Mm-hmm. So for you, someone who maybe didn't have any horror stories growing up in Homewood, you still very much, it seems like, knew moments of racism and anti-racism and everything in between. So talk a little bit about what that felt like for you growing up in that space.
So the thing that sticks out to me is that for people who might have conversations with me or know my interests or hang out with me on a regular basis, I don't really fit the stereotype of the American black man, in the sense that I wear boots and skinny jeans, I play guitar, and most of my friends are white. So I've often gotten the remark that, oh, you're not really black, or you're basically white, as if that is some sort of compliment that's being paid, that I'm more like white people than I am like black people, which really, before I even realized what it was doing, it kind of awakened the sense of insecurity that I have not been able to shake for my entire life. It just makes you question, is this action going to warrant some sort of judgment, for better or for worse? Specifically here, coming to Fusion when I was in high school, and I wasn't necessarily very close to the guys that are in my grade. I had a couple of good friends, but for the most part, it felt like I was invisible to those guys, and I heard them say very racist things, even here at the church in our Fusion group. And I don't think that was out of hate. I just think it was out of ignorance. But it doesn't really matter when you're the victim or on the receiving end of a racist remark. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. It still hurts. And I was lucky when I was young to be a part of the contact band. So on Wednesday nights, I would just go to rehearsal instead of going to Fusion. And so I'm glad I didn't fall off and lose touch with this place. But I think that there are a lot of people that might. There's no way to know who could be falling through the cracks because of ignorance or because of just remarks that are off the cuff and not really thought through.
All right, so Trinity is a predominantly white church. 98% of the folks that are a part of this community are white. An element in our student ministry, we want this place to be a space where students are known, loved, and connected. And it sounds like from what you just shared, as much as we want that, and as much as you've been a part of our community for 10 years now, we all think of you as this great leader in our church. It sounds like a lot of us really dropped the ball on that. So what would you say, thinking about what it was like to grow up in Element here as a black person?
I think that there was definitely a sense of, I need to prove my worthiness to be here and to be on a platform here. I think I was still trying to figure it out. I didn't really know what it meant to be black in America, just because I grew up very privileged. I grew up the exception to the statistics. My parents did a lot so that I never had to face a lot of realities that people that look like me often do. But at the same time, as I started to realize the stereotypes that came with being black, I felt like I had to make sure that I always, said the word completely correctly and didn't leave a preposition off, or just making sure that we're speaking complete sentences and making sure. I just didn't want anyone to have any point to connect me to a stereotype. And as I've gotten older and even come onto staff here, it feels that I've had to prove myself worthy of that love and this platform of leadership through what I do for the church. So it feels like because I'm a worship leader here and because I work for the youth ministry, that is the reason why people value me, and not because I am how I am. Because before Christian came on staff here, and then eventually Jean-Marc, I was the only black guy here, and that came with insecurity, and it also felt like it came with weight. Just the responsibility to try to represent black people in a white space well.
All right, so you talked a little bit about what it's been like for you to have to find your worth and your value, or at least that perception that you have to prove yourself. Where would you say are gaps that in our student ministry we're not actually fulfilling that hope and that covenant of students being known, loved, and connected?
So I'll preface by saying I realize that microaggressions are very nuanced, and it's you have to learn. It's not something that comes naturally. So I don't say any of this as if it is intentional, but I know that we have several black students that are regulars at Element Cafe, and they come into this church. It's a place where they're supposed to be able to connect with Jesus above all else, and Jesus doesn't look like them in this church, in the sense that a lot of the wall art or our nativity scenes are white people. And that might not seem like a big deal, but we all want to see ourselves in Jesus. We worship Jesus. We worship the Lord. But if the Lord doesn't look like us, that creates a barrier for connection. And I don't think that depictions are the end-all be-all by any means, but this is a place that obviously has a set image of how Jesus looks, and it kind of feels like you don't belong there if you don't look like that. Even, less serious than that, we're expected to, we do a lot of karaoke type things here, just fun stuff to get people comfortable. But let's say that someone transfers from a place that is not as familiar with the references we make, so they don't listen to Taylor Swift, or they're not familiar with all of the hot new Snapchat filters. It's like, we're creating all of these opportunities for connection, but they're only for people who are from this type of culture that get those things. And so I've always wondered what it could be like if we did find other ways to diversify, not only in terms of skin color, but like, what does it look like to be a culturally diverse church, celebrating things that are outside of the white calendar.
All right, so let's talk about winning people over. You just mentioned that a minute ago. Like that to me is one of the most frustrating statements. When I look at you and I think about who you are and I think about what you've done for our community and for our church and for our students, the idea that you feel this need, and frankly, it's true that you have to win people over in this church where people love you so much. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that stands out to me is less so with our youth group, but just with the members of the church that are from my parents' generation. So for people that don't know, my father played basketball at UAB back here in Birmingham in the 80s, and a lot of our parents and a lot of people in the greater Birmingham area are just familiar with him because he was great apparently, but I didn't say that. But it's just very interesting to see how I don't have a connection with a lot of people, but then when they find out who my dad is, then we're shaking hands every Sunday morning, and it feels like that has been the point that that people realize that I am worth their attention or their affections. It's just very strange because it feels like you're invisible until you prove your worth. I think that was one of the things that really, for some reason, guided how I acted throughout all of my teenage years. Is like I was less focused on being true to myself and being true to my convictions so much as just making sure that people liked me enough to just notice me.
You talked a lot about what you felt like you needed to do throughout middle school and high school, particularly at Element and at Trinity, and also Homewood at large. What do you wish that your white friends, when you were in middle school and high school, had said to you, not said to you, and seen in you?
I think the thing I wish I could express to people is that actions speak way louder than words. And so if you tell someone, I'm not racist, but then you make a racist joke, I have to believe that you are racist because you just took racist action. When something horrible happens, something that is just so bad that the world riots, silence is so much louder than words of affirmation or support. And so in the last few weeks, the world has America's been pushed to the brink in a sense. And I've just seen so many of my white friends, people who tell me that they love me, not say anything. And this has been one of the most painful things I've had to experience in my, my adult life. I'm still pretty young, but it's just hard to reconcile that because I have to think about my grandparents my grandmother was born in 1930. So for the first half of her life, she was not even legally equal to white people in this country. And to know that, I only have one grandmother that's alive now, but to know that she has to see that the world is still exactly where it was when she was young. If not, the internet has just made everything just so connected to where something terrible could happen in Seattle, but we know about it in 5 minutes. And so to know that the same racism that she experienced still exists in real time, it's so disappointing. One of the things we do here at Element every summer is we go to SOS, which is in the Binghamton neighborhood in Memphis. And both of my parents grew up in Memphis, but specifically my grandfather grew up in Binghamton in the very neighborhood that we serve when we go on SOS. And I actually didn't know that until the first time I went and had a conversation about it with my grandmother, and it just completely changed the meaning of that whole trip for me because, we're having lunch on Friday afternoon in the park that my grandfather played in when he was a child. And so To see the compassion that we display. We'll come in van loads of white children and people of privilege to this neighborhood that, it's it's a loving neighborhood, but economically they need help. But what's hard for me is seeing after we leave that we're not changed. We do all of this service work, and we make relationships with these families and their kids and their neighbors, and we come back and it's like it doesn't impact us. We're not willing to change our point of view to help our neighbors. We don't, it's like our compassion stops when we hit the state line. And it's been really hard for me to enjoy that mission trip in the past, just because it doesn't feel sincere. It feels like we're making ourselves the good guy in that situation. But these are our neighbors who are marginalized, and it's due to the agendas that we support, because we're not willing to put our own viewpoints and our own opinions aside to realize that these people are crying for help. It doesn't make sense for us to keep repairing these roofs if the things that we support are going to just put more holes in the roof.
All right, so you talked about how to, let's say, SOS, and when we work up there and we do this roofing work and we have this great week, I think a lot of us, we go up there and we come back and we think we had this amazing experience, right? That we were able to really help people, and that maybe our perspectives have changed a little bit, or we've perhaps seen something that we in our little over the mountain community bubble have not yet seen in our lives. Help me understand why that week alone, just doing that work, that can't be enough, that we can't just say, oh, we repaired a roof and that's good enough, that'll fix things and make things better. Why is that not true in the end?
I'm going to start with what I mean by privilege. And what I mean by privilege is that we grew up here in Homewood, which is the #1 school system in the state of Alabama. So Homewood is a great place. We have everything we need. We have a mall, we have a Target, we have a Walmart, we have doctors. We don't have to leave Homewood to have our needs met. Which means that combined with our education, we're unstoppable. We can get into the best schools. We can have the newest phone. We can have the best car, because we're not worried about putting food on the table. That is such a basic need that's met without question. And so when we live our life on that plane, but we just forget about the people who don't have the privilege of having education, because education affords opportunity. And without opportunity, there's no money. And without money, food becomes the thing that you're worried about, not your phone and not your car. We're living a life that is just elevated beyond having to worry about basic needs. That is not the reality for most people beyond America in the world. We are in the top percentiles of living, and we forget about it because our phone has a crack in it and we have to get that repaired. It is, and I know I'm a black man, but I grew up in that same privilege, and so it's very easy to forget that. And I think the only reason that it means so much to me now is because my parents didn't have that luxury growing up. My grandparents especially didn't. And when we look back at our history, that's what's so tough to recognize, is that some of our ancestors had privilege and others didn't, and we don't want to be the bad guys. We don't want to think that our ancestors hurt other people. I think that's why we're kind of stuck here, is just because we don't want to be the bad guys.
All right, so talking about getting then unstuck, sounds like what I'm hearing from you is we can't just think that doing simple acts once a week or 1 week out of the year is enough. Mm-hmm. That really, especially for people of privilege, people of white skin, we have to understand that it can't just be, oh, I've helped someone out and so I'm not racist, or I've done this work, or I have a worship leader that's black at our predominantly white church and suddenly I'm not racist. That it has to be beyond thinking of what is around me and think about what I have to offer others and what I can give up, right? The privilege that I often afford of voting for people that can best help my own privilege. If I want to actually help my brother, actually help my neighbor, I have to look at things that might even be a sacrifice to me. Yeah,
I think if we ever get to a place in any sense, as white people, as privileged people, as black people, if we ever get to a place where we're patting ourselves on the back, we probably need to stop and check ourselves. We just have to face the reality that when we when we are afforded a platform, we're afforded an obligation as well, and that obligation is to be a voice for the voiceless and to be hope for the hopeless. Like, we have to do that. We're failing our entire human race, and we're failing the entire gospel, if you ask me, if we can't do that. Those are our basic requirements as Christians and as just good people. It's a tough thing to do. It's not a small ask, but it is necessary, and we'll never progress if we can't stop and listen.
All right, so then talking about being unstuck practically day to day, right? We talked a lot about SOS and what that trip might look like. What does it look like for a middle schooler or a high schooler day to day then?
I think it is going to take just a reality check, and that reality is that white people in the United States are afforded privilege and opportunity that other people are not. And that can look a whole plethora of ways. And specifically in Homewood, it's important to remember that, because a lot of the black people you see are exceptions to the rule. I'm an exception to the rule, and so often I feel like people forget that I don't have the full scope of privilege that they have, you know. I was driving through Dothan, Alabama a couple of years ago, and I stopped in a gas station where I got nothing but dirty looks to the point where I just left. I don't mean that to say that the world is racist. I just mean that because in the sense that there are realities that no matter how close we are in the classroom or on the football field or on the band field, we can never understand each other's realities. And in this country, white people have the upper hand. And if we don't embrace that fact and try to change it, I think that this country and our relationships with each other are doomed. It's what we have to do to be loving, is listen.
So listening here at Element, what does that practically look like? Because when I think about your role here, I think it can be very easy for students who are white to say, Cameron's my worship leader, I'm not racist. Cameron's my friend, Cameron's my youth leader, Cameron's my leader. Like, we talk all the time and it's all good. Why is that not enough for students to understand? So
here at Element, typically people are projecting the best versions of themselves. It's what we do. This is the house of God, so we want to be as close to that as we can, but it's about what we do when we go outside of the walls of the church and we're in our private group messages or we're in small groups of friends. Like, when somebody says something that is offensive or hurtful, are you speaking up, and are you defending your friends, the people who you say you love, the people who are on your teams with you? You can't be silent when it's time to stand up for them. You know, it's like when a doctor doesn't show up for surgery. It's like you're just leaving people hanging at an opportunity where you really do have power to adjust the situation. And I think it's also very important to remember that by that same token, it is not your black friend's responsibility. It's not my responsibility to tell you how you're being racist, or for you to just come to me and ask how to not be racist. It's your responsibility to have black people, a diverse group of friends, you know, even beyond black people are not the only people who are having a hard time in this country. You know, we have Hispanic people, we have the indigenous people of this country. There are a lot of people who have their own battles to fight, but if we're not diversifying our friend group and our inner circles, then how are we ever gonna realize how we're blind and how we're hurting people in this world? It's really important to have conversations and try to understand each other. It's easy to get drowned out in the echo chamber. So that's really the only way to truly understand someone is just to sit down and have a personalized conversation with them.
Okay, so for this video and this opportunity, all I really wanted was to hear your story at sort of the base level, for you to share your perspective of growing up here in Homewood as a black kid in Homewood, but then what it was like to grow up here in Element and now to work here as well. I know how much you love this church and these students in our community, and it's very clear in what you're saying today of the immense growth we still have. As much as we might think we've gotten somewhere, that we may have gotten here, we have to go so much further. What do you want to say to our students today who are on some level, in some place, wrestling with how can they actually live out like that prayer that Jesus taught us of bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth?
I grew up here in Homewood. I owe a lot of the best parts of myself to this church and to this community. but I will be honest and say that I owe a lot of my insecurities to these same places. I think I want the same thing that anybody else in life wants. It's just validation and affirmation that I alone as a human being am enough. And it's not because I'm the worship leader or because I was on the drum line in high school or because any other achievement or any other service that I've offered that is the reason why people respect me. I want to be respected because I'm a person. And I don't even mean to say that that isn't the case. A lot of times it is very much so the case. People are very loving in this town, but at the same time there is a lot of hate that's still alive in all of our communities, and we have to call that out. We have to be able to listen, and we have to, most importantly, get over the idea that going back on something you previously said is weak. I think that there's so much power in growth, and this is something that we have to grow in for all of our sakes, because a team is only as strong as its weakest player, and we didn't ask to be on this team, but here we are, and our survival and our world depends on it. And going back to what you said about Jesus's heaven come to earth, heaven does not look like this, and if we think that heaven, it looks like at every turn combating someone that says they're hurting with a reason why they're inaccurate or a reason why they're wrong, that's not what Jesus does. Jesus listens. We're not listening. I think it's just really, really important that we recognize our own flaws as human beings and adjust.
What is your understanding of the kingdom of heaven then? Because you can see what it's not, so then what is it?
I think the kingdom of heaven is just loving, plain and simple. I don't think our opinions need to matter so much as people's true experiences. I think that compassion is what prevails. People are allowed to go out and chase their dreams without having to worry about dying, for lack of a better word. I think the kingdom of heaven is just peaceful. I think the kingdom of heaven is filled with justice. Just things that in my lifetime I haven't seen prevail in a mighty way. I think that it could be very powerful for the world, but starting here at home at Element, it could be so powerful if we all not only lived out the vision of Christ and the love of Christ in our inner lives, but also with our actions and with the way that we treated the people in our community and beyond. Big change doesn't start on a big level. It starts with individuals, and we all have to take individual responsibility for seeing God's kingdom come to earth.